Slight microphone adjustment. I'm considerably more apprehensive now than I was 29 years ago when I was last in this room, trying to remember the origins of the French Revolution, but I'll do my best to hide it. So, diversity for UK farmers clearly can take many forms. Long crop rotations, integrating livestock for arable farmers, growing small amounts of high-value crops, adding value through bread or flour or farm shops or whatever. And if you want the last word on farm diversity of businesses, just go and visit Ben's farm, where it's a kind of extraordinary kind of agricultural mall of every farm enterprise imaginable. For some people, it could involve agroforestry. I bumped into Stephen Briggs on the way in here, so I'm going to leave any questions about agroforestry to him. I've done a little bit of it. I was very lucky to do some of it with someone called Ernst Gotch. And the first thing that he did was to dig a hole about 1 metre deep in, no mean feat actually, in our heavily degraded clay soils. And at the bottom of that metre, he found some fossilised tree roots of the trees that were growing there and compared that with the 15 centimetres of rooting of the plants that were there at the time and just talked about the enormous potential of this land that was being unused. And my son increased in size over the 5 years between those pictures as well, and it just gives you an idea of the extraordinary potential for biomass creation that these systems that can offer. What I want to talk about really is what I've focused on is about how can we bring diversity into existing systems, how can we maintain diverse plant communities for as much of the time as possible. So cover crops, bicrops, polycrops, pasture crops, annual companions, perennial companions, and so on and so forth. And I became fascinated with this at the beginning of my farming career when I was, things were going very badly. I was aware that, or was becoming aware that I didn't have the vast array of skills required to be a farmer. It was a pretty dark period, and I came out of that thanks to having the fortune to come across the sort of pre- and post-World War II cohort of authors, thinkers and farmers, people like Lady Balfour, Albert Howard, Lord Northbourne, who taught here, in fact, I think. And whilst implementing some of their ideas, I was doing like crimper-rolled cover crops. You can see there on the right-hand side, vetch, and direct drilling maize into that. And I was also doing some herbal lays. I was really struck by the difference visually in terms of smell. I wasn't doing laboratory testing, but in terms of smelling and earthworm counts and so on, between the soil recovery where the pasture was compared to my cover crop monoculture. So I became obsessed with trying to not plough that up and how could I grow crops within those pastures. I was farming organically. There were many failures. There were occasional successes. I ended up developing a mower to try and see if we could control the pasture plants that way, and had some success with that. But when I tried to replicate that, that success wasn't always to be had. And here we can see an example where it wasn't going well. And you've got grasses in a cereal crop sown into grasses in the pasture. And at this point, I came across Dr. Christine Jones, an amazing Australian soil scientist, and realized that the magic was happening not because the plants were perennial, but because they were diverse. Here, obviously, they're not. She's done lots of fascinating work on this. Like all new ideas, it's nothing new about it at all. This is the classic sort of indigenous farming technique of the three sisters, where the maize and the bean and the squashes all grow together. And presumably they've come across these systems or evolved into these systems because it performed better than monocrops of any of them. More recently, there were trials at Wakelins, where you can see there on the left and right of that graph are monocultures of wheat and monocultures of beans, and the higher productivity in the middle of that graph with various combinations of the two. And that backs up what was still going on, an amazing 15-year trial in Germany called the Jena crop trials, where they're equating higher biomass productivity with increasing species diversity. The next couple of slides actually are lifted from their website. I hope no copyright infringement, but I definitely recommend you visiting that site. It's an amazing trial. But just to give an idea of what's going on here. And on one level, you can see that different rooting depths is, if you like, expanding the carbon sponge. So we're getting more water retention and ability to weather climatic extremes in this way. The greater diversity of root exudates from all these plants is creating a greater diversity of microbial life, and that's leading to greater nutrient ability. And anyone who's sown a diverse cover crop mix with the time and the moisture to do its thing will have seen just how much nutrients they can mine with little or no inputs, often producing really impressive amounts of biomass. And this microbial diversity, it isn't just around the plants and in the soil, it's in the plants themselves. There's an absolutely amazing American scientist called Mary Lucero, who, despite dogged institutional resistance from her largely male superiors, she stuck with this for 30 years and essentially focusing on these endophytes, so the bacteria and fungi that live within the plants themselves, and essentially painted a picture that, like humans, we're sort of 10% human, the rest of this amazing microbial universe. Well, the same goes for plants, and she demonstrated this beautifully when she analysed the DNA from a salt bush, and when that went to be sort of compared in the DNA library, as it were, it came back as being the same as whales. That's whales, W-H-A-L-E-S. And the reason for that was that what was being sequenced was a salt-loving fungi that was in the plant, which was the same salt-loving fungi that was in the skins of whales. So apart from being a very telling lesson about how siloing aspects of nature is a fool's errand, it also gives us some kind of insight, I think, into how these, when we say that plant communities can call for help, what's actually going on there, because these endophytes can move between plants. And that call for help has very practical, real-world applications. This is an example of a monoculture of triticale in the foreground, triticale sown with companions in the background. It's a drought, and you can see what's happened to one. So our kind of perhaps simplistic notions that plants are competing for moisture, and if there's any other plants other than one type that we want, that's a bad thing. It's just not how nature works. These systems don't have to be complicated. This is an example, again, courtesy of Christine Jones, these photos, a farmer who put beans and rapeseed and oats in with the lime they wanted to spread, broadcast it onto the field and harrowed it in and left it alone. So it doesn't have to involve a lot of expensive technology. Predictably, when we have these polycultural cropping systems, we see very marked differences in insect life, above ground diversity. One of the things that the Wildfarmed team and I are working really hard on is getting arable land recognised as a biodiversity landscape, because at the moment, if I rewilded a field, I could get up to £1,000 for biodiversity net gain payments. If I'm cropping in a polycultural way and creating biodiversity that way, the maximum payment I can get is £55 a hectare. And that doesn't strike me as being fair. So we're working very hard on that, and hopefully today's DEFRA announcement, which I haven't read yet, but hopefully there's something in there for us, we'll see. The nutrient diversity from all this microbial community doesn't just mean plant health, it also means human health. This is an example of very marked increases in micronutrients in a wheat crop after just one cover crop. That backs up what we're finding in our wild farm analysis of antioxidants in these kind of cropping systems, which are always higher and sometimes double. And so when we're trying to implement these systems, the key, I suppose, is to not try and disrupt the microbial systems that we're trying to work in harmony with. So essentially what that's meant for us as a wild farm community of farmers is a nutrition based on need approach. So test the plant, only add what's needed, don't damage what you're trying to nurture through excess. So if it's so good, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, I suppose the barrier to adoption, or one of them, is post-harvest processing. We're working very hard on that to be able to accept not just diverse varieties of a given crop, but those grown with another crop as well. So wheat and beans or barley and pea, whatever it might be, separating those out and accepting that and creating a market for that. I suppose like any other new farming practice or old farming practice, depending on your perspective, but it's mental and it's cultural, like what does success look like? And coming into farming from the outside, it struck me as being bizarre, or definitely at best and unreasonable at worst, I suppose, that we've basically asked farmers for decades to deliver one thing, like yield is what counts. And now we've said, actually, can you deliver something completely different, but the rest of the extractive food system is going to remain the same? Well, that can't make any sense. And so I think the power of community is really important, and a community that goes beyond farmers to consumers, because they've got to engage in this as well. Obviously, the organic movement has done this for decades. They've offered people a choice at point of sale to back a certain type of farming. On a much smaller scale, the wild farm community is around 90 farmers and 400 customers now, all of whom are collectively engaged in bringing this power of plant diversity into cropping systems. So with 24 seconds left to go, I think there's a really enticing prospect here in that we can use our technology and ingenuity to really work with nature rather than suppress it. And as seed separation technology gets better, mixtures and crop mixtures that were only available to communities that were processing their crops by hand will become available as an option for us too. And I think that diversity, if we look around us, is nature's organisational principle. And if we're going to build a resilient system, we have to start from there. Thanks.